Great. So hello, welcome. Um, I I was trying to figure out exactly how to start this talk, and I realized I really wanted it to be more of an informal discussion. So I set some places at my kitchen table for you guys, virtually, I suppose. But I suppose if someone shows up, I'll have to answer the door and let you guys in. I want to talk about today is how do we set up a pragmatic proactive safety program, and part of that is for us to be able to reveal the things that are invisible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it takes to see the invisible. And so I really do want it to be kind of a conversation. I've left a ton of time for questions and conversation, and I, even in the slides where it looks like I'm actually saying something prescriptive, I want you guys to know that this is just our take. We've seen some things out in different industries that are working, and I want to share those with you. But this is early. These are early days for you can call it a safety 2 program, a proactive program. There's lots of different ideas, lots of different interpretations. Even if we all agree on the terms, like how to put those into action. So I want this to be a conversation starter. I'm hoping that there are other folks on the phone that can share some of their story as well, potentially, or ask questions so we can get at some of those things. And that really this helps us connect all of the folks that we know that are doing this kind of work, so we can all do it together in the future. So that's the hope. So I will get started. I want to use these slides as kind of a framework for the conversation and let the conversation kind of go where it will. So with that said, let's get started. So I'm going to take it a little bit, I don't know if for those of you who read the abstract of this talk, I'm going to take it a little bit out of order. And you can, this says, so you want to build a proactive safety program. You can fill in the blank with a couple different things there, but I want to start thinking about what, so I've talked actually with some of you on the phone or on the webinar about your programs and how you're making sense of this. And there's some differences there, and I want to share with you some of the things that we're seeing. First, though, I realize that maybe we're in different places in our journey, so I'm not going to hit these. Some of you guys have seen these slides from me. I'm not going to hit all of it, but what we're going to focus on primarily is this safety 2 view of the world. There's definitely a place for safety 1, but that's not what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on this idea of safety 2. I'm going to hit some of the high points here just so we get some grounding, and then we're going to run into this proactive safety idea. So. I think the biggest difference in safety 1 is a safety 1 professional has been trained to think that we keep things safe by one, kind of saving people from themselves, by creating more rules and regulations, and if you comply with the rules and regulations, we will keep things safe. And safety 2 professionals are trained to think sometimes that's true, but oftentimes, and as we get more complex, that's not true. Simply complying with the rules, simply doing everything that I'm told, that will not keep us safe. And it goes to the underlying difference between safety 1 and safety 2, and this comes down here. Our system's inherently safe. Safety 1 says yes, except for those people, and I'm oversimplifying. And safety 2 is saying, no, they're not safe. We need these people with their skills, with their expertise to keep it safe every day. And moving forward, a safety 1 professional, again, this should be kind of a logical extension. How do we measure safety? How do we keep people safe? We count errors, we count incidents, we measure compliance. Safety 2 is harder. We're trying to analyze what are the things in our system that are at odds with each other. We're analyzing goal conflicts. We're looking at workarounds. We're looking at the gap between procedures and practice, between work is done and work is imagined. And from there, we're trying to determine potential likelihood and impact of risks. So we're both looking at risk. We're looking at risk in a very, very different way. So I'm gonna, unless there are questions about safety 1 and safety 2, which not just yet. That's the backdrop. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but we can certainly talk about it if that's what the group wants to talk about. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. The second thing to talk about is how to see the invisible. And what I've realized, and this is actually with some of my work with folks that do work with things like X-rays, with things like you're looking at the what ultraviolet reveals versus what our eye visible light reveals, hyperspectral analysis. You realize that things are not, nothing is truly invisible, but you need a set of eyes. You need a sensing mechanism to be able to see them, and that's true. That's true both literally and metaphorically. There's lots of things that are going on in the system that that will go on right in front of our face that we just don't see because we're not appropriately primed to see it. And what I realize is as we all go through our journey through safety, through system safety, through resilience engineering, through safety 1 and safety 2, this training, this exposure to different things, this gives us a new set of eyes. And these new eyes are hard earned. It's hard work to get this new set of eyes. And so, we're learning and mastering new concepts. We're learning new patterns. So we're going to talk a lot about adaptation and edges of the system today. And like, how do we understand how to see adaptation? What kind, what does that even mean? In fact, in one situation, we went into an organization and we asked them just kind of openly, so tell me, this is quite a while ago now, tell me where you adapt. And the frontline workers all looked at us like we were idiots because we're like, what do you mean? I adapt all the time. That's my work. That's my job. You're going to have to be more specific. This is happening all the time. And yet it's difficult for us as outsiders to sometimes truly appreciate that. And that's part of it, is trying to get inside and understand that. So we want to learn these new patterns. We want to collect. We want to collect a set. We want a toolkit. We want a utility belt of patterns that when we see triggers for those patterns, like, oh, that might be an example of this. And I'm going to show you guys a couple patterns around adaptation towards the end. But without those patterns, without those kind of archetypical notions of how things are done, you may miss it entirely, or you may diagnose it as something else. Just like this poor fellow down here, may have been diagnosed the first couple times, with a sinus headache. Well, no, he doesn't have a sinus headache, or she doesn't have a sinus headache. She's got a nail in her face. So I want to think about, how do we make, in general, this is how we make the invisible visible, is we put a new set of eyes on it. And that can literally be a new person coming into the situation, or that can be, helping people to develop a set of tactics and strategies about seeing these things. All right, so that's the first part.
You have a comment.
Here's the second part.
From Bogue. Okay, lovely. If you look in the chat.
Yes, Bogue, thank you. Yeah, so Bogue says, for sure, we saw it took about 6 months for us safety observers to stop seeing crew performance through a safety 1 lens. Excellent. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing we would expect to see. Thanks, Bogue, for sharing. So here's the dark secret about the safety 2 graphic. So if you guys, so for those of you who guys are kind of in the weeds with safety 2, you've seen this graphic before. And the way this graphic is usually presented is, from a safety 1 perspective, we're trying to figure out what's going wrong and try to mitigate what's going wrong. And we realize in these ultra safe industries, that's this percentage roughly of the entire the entire body or volume of work that's going on. So we understand that for ultra safe industries, accidents happen less than 1 in 10,000 opportunities. That's really low. And what we start to talk about in safety 2 is that we don't want to just look at what goes wrong. In fact, we want to really deprioritize our effort in looking at what goes wrong. We want to look at what goes right. And I think that is a wonderful mnemonic for thinking about safety 2 and getting people to start their journey from safety 1. But I think it's just a little too cute, because it's not just about what's going right. It's about what's going on, because in the moment, we're never going to be 100% sure if what we're seeing is going right or going wrong. We only know if it goes right or goes wrong after something goes wrong. So retrospectively, we can go back and say, oh, that was definitely wrong. Now, some things are more clear than others, but it's very difficult. So what I'd like us to think about is that it's not, I think safety 2 is not really about seeking out the things that are going right. It's certainly not a quest for seeking out what's going right, although we want to do that. It's certainly not a quest for seeking out what's going wrong, although there are times where we have to do that. In fact, they're pretty prevalent. or not prevalent, that's what we know, but we spend a lot of energy on that right now. What I want us to think about is that we need to understand how work is going on. We need to understand all of it. Now, that sounds lovely, but here's the dark secret. Ugh. That's a lot of ground to cover. That's a lot of ground to cover. In fact, if you do the quick math, it's 10,000 times as much work probably if we want to try to understand all of this work like we try to understand this little bit of work. So where are we going to recruit our new army? And that's how we could talk about. I talk about a bunch of different ways. I talk about deputizing. I talk about recruiting. When I'm with a healthcare audience, I talk about metastasizing. Like we need to be able to reach as many people to help us with this as possible, reach as many resources as possible. We need to utilize analytics and machines wherever possible, although they create some of their own problems we won't talk about today, or issues, unintended consequences. We need to be able to recruit. And so we have some choices. Now, I'm going to oversimplify a lot in the next 3 or 4 slides, but more or less, you have, for people you could recruit, you have 3 choices. And again, and this is where if the comments want to blow up and there are more choices, I'm happy to talk about them. But really, we have you can go call the external experts. And there, because Safety 2 is getting more and more momentum, there are a number of external experts out there. Some of them started the Safety 2 movement. And for the purpose of this, I'm gonna talk about New View, which is Dave Wood's formulation of this, and I'm sorry, New Look for Dave Wood's, New View for Sidney Decker, and Safety 2, which is a formulation of Eric Holmegel, Bob Weers, and a couple other people most recently. For today, I'm going to talk about all those kind of the same way. So with all that said, there are quite a few people who understand Safety 2, have seen it in a variety of industries, and can come and help you. There are also what I'm calling, I'm very kind of vague and broad here. They're the internal project workers in your organization. If you work for an organization who does safety critical, business critical work, and these are the folks. This is the safety team. This could be a performance team. This could be an investigation team. These are folks that they do, or they at least part of their work, they identify they're doing it as projects. I'm moving from part of the organization to part of the organization and trying to make things safe, or make things more efficient, or make things something else. And then there are the frontline workers, and they're and so the frontline workers are actually doing this safety critical work. We call them the sharpest of the sharp end, and so they're actually doing this work. These are the nurses, the physicians, the surgeons, the pilots, the air traffic controllers, the operators in the control center of the nuclear power plant. They're the ones that do the work. And there's some characteristics of each of these 3. So as we talked about with these new eyes, and these are overgeneralizations, but I think they basically hold up. Your experts are going to be the most trained on this. They're going to have seen the most. They're going to see it in multiple industries, but they're the fewest. There aren't that many of them. Your internal project workers, they're and I don't know if it's actually 16 to 1 or not. I just put this on here for for notional, just to demonstrate the point. There are more of them. So in most organizations, some organizations, you might have a 1-to-1 external expert to internal project worker. And the frontline workers in most industries are going to be, considerably more, arithmetically more, maybe geometrically more than your internal project workers. These are the folks that do that work. Now, the one thing I did not put on here, and I guess it would be over here on the right side, are bots, analytics, machine learning, AI, all that kind of stuff as well. That could have, we're not going to talk about that today, but we could also, we have these, we have software that could be helping us do this as well. And basically, what does our army need to do? And with this one, I didn't have a good slide for it. In fact, I did have a good slide and I forgot to put it in. What I think we need to think about as Safety 2 is we're not talking about investigating. We're not talking about primarily creating a plan. We're not talking about responding. That's not the primary part of safety 2, although it includes those things. It's surveillance. It's now if you think about the Honagel's cornerstones, which became potentials, I think what I'm going to focus in on is the monitor and anticipate parts of it. So how am I monitoring what's going on in the world so that I can anticipate, not at a sharp end level, but literally at the blunt end as an organization? How can I monitor what's going on in the organization so that I can intervene? That's the respond. So that I can learn, so that I can redirect resources. So what do we need to do? We need to gather data. If we're going to do surveillance, we need to be able to be collecting data of some form or flavor. That could be surveys, interviews, organizational data, stuff in databases, observations. We can also look at artifacts that people are creating. We can have people keep diaries. Like, there's all kinds of stuff we can do. Then we need to analyze the data, figure out what's meaningful. That could be a statistical analysis, some kind of advanced analytic AI. That can be more qualitative methods like constant comparative, grounded theory. Kind of more generally a pattern analysis. We need to report or escalate the findings as necessary, and we need to intervene and respond. And basically, the way I'm thinking about it is we need to kind of do this kind of light surveillance that helps us understand the world, and we need to have resources ready to go do a more intense surveillance in areas where we think that's necessary. Now, going back to our graphic, we can't do it everywhere. If this is all of work, I can't be intense everywhere, but hopefully with my light surveillance, whatever I choose to do as my light surveillance, it can help me understand pockets where I need to redirect resources. Now, and those resources are probably coming in the flavor of this project work. These are the resources that can move around. Frontline workers probably can't as much, or bringing in external experts. So again, what can our new army do? And what are things that are interesting about our new army? I talked about this already a little bit. I tend to do that. I tend to go out of order. Okay, just checking to see if there's chatter. Not yet. So again, those external experts, we can expect to have the most extensive training, see it in most places, and for the right price, they can invest 100% of their time, on your problem or your place to go look further. The internal project workers, again, on average, on balance, are going to have less training than external experts. They can invest a portion of their time. Their time is a little bit more tied up in the day-to-day, and they're closer to the system. And the frontline workers often have little to no training in these kind of analyst skills or relevant concepts, and they can invest really pretty little of their own time because they've got day jobs, and those day jobs primarily don't have to do with safety, except everything has to do with safety. They have to do with something else, patient care, keeping planes in the air, producing energy, whatever that primary focus of that organization is. However, those frontline workers are best at describing their real work. So these are some of the characteristics I think that are relevant in figuring out how we can utilize dynamically each of these different groups. So this probably should say a sweet spot for our new army, but I was feeling grand when I wrote it, so I put the sweet spot for our new army. So I think that there are roles for all of these different groups. The frontline workers, they can record data about their work if we have it targeted, if it doesn't take too much time, and it's still meaningful both to them and the organization. So what I realized is a lot of times so I'm going to kind of go out of order here too. Our external experts have the ability to parachute in and wildly improvise. Like they go see that, they can see it, they can compare it to things that they've seen in the other place and create this kind of custom plan. They can pretty adroitly or adeptly pull from all the patterns in their pattern book. They can put it together. Maybe some of you guys have seen this in action. And it all looks very fluid. What we realized is that as you move to folks that are trying to do this work in the organization, so say a safety management organization, or safety managers in that organization, and the frontline workers especially, don't have those skills yet, don't have that kind of conceptual knowledge to be able to pull those patterns and adapt them quite as readily. So as we move down, so frontline workers, yes, they can collect data, but we found that if I ask them to collect open-ended data about what's the problem, or when do you adapt, or anything that's that open, what I get is what I get is not what I expected, and it's also frustrating for them. It's frustrating for us. So these things have to be much more targeted, and that's also true if we're going to ask the internal project workers to take a significant role in data collection and analysis. We have to, if we're going to rely on them for the majority of it. And by the way, my note at the bottom says as an organization, you need to rely on your people to do this analysis, not the external experts. It has to be a little bit more tailored. Now, hopefully everybody increases, and as they move on their journey, they get a little bit better at all these things. So we can improvise a little bit more. We can adapt a little bit more. We can, but this is what we're seeing. And then the external experts, we really want to use them very sparingly. Now, and I hopefully that's not troublesome to the other external experts that are on this call or not, are hearing this recorded when they hear it. But what we're realizing is that as external experts, we are external, which means one, we can't keep pace with what the organization is doing, and we'll never have enough time, no matter how much you pay us, no matter how many of us you try to clone us. We just don't have enough time for a true proactive safety program. So we want to educate on concepts. We want to assist on difficult analyses. We want to direct where the large-scale safety efforts are going. What would a frontline worker data collection practice look like? What would your safety organization data collection look like? And then the big one is, how do we create and share these generic patterns? How do we help everybody else to practice and test their new set of eyes? And again, and this is a caution, if you find in this program that you're having your external experts actually do the blocking and tackling work, that's not sustainable. It can work for a while, but it's not sustainable. So ultimately your internal organization has to be self-sustaining, because that's the only way you're going to keep pace.
So we have a
comment. Oh, great question from Vogue. How do we get frontline worker buy-in that this will be valuable and show them positive feedback with their efforts? Also, please expand on the note about external experts. Yeah, so I'll answer the second one first. Yes, external experts are the individuals outside of your organization, like me. We have a role, we want to play a role, but what I'm saying is our role has to be guiding, not leading, and listening. And that's what I'm gonna get to the next slide, is listening to see what's working and providing feedback about what other things could work. But the engine of this thing, what I'm proposing here, the engine of this thing has to be internal. So now the first one, how do you get frontline worker buy-in? So there's a chicken and an egg here. You need to ask your frontline workers to do something that's small enough so that they'll do it. You need to have enough trust with them to know that you are on their team. So, because what you're asking them to do is probably sensitive information in one way or another. You're going to ask them. So what we're going to talk about is adaptation, and adaptation means I'm having to decide between these two rules, or I'm not following the rules in this particular situation, or I've had to do something on my own. I didn't ask for permission first. I had to do something on my own. That's sensitive, and it happens all the time. So part of it is you have to get that trust. You have to assure them, and you have to back it up that they will not get in trouble for sharing. And then you need to be able, and again, it's got to be lightweight enough so that they'll give it a shot for some amount of time. And the smaller it is, I think the longer they'll give it a shot. And then you need to be able to back it up to say, now, even if it doesn't benefit you in this 6-month or 9-month period that you're doing it in, here's what we're tracking, and here's why we're doing it. And so if we're seeing this thing not just for you, but across, in your case, Bogue, across, all of our pilots, if we're starting to see these things across all of our pilots, we will start, if I start seeing that we're starting to relax certain goals or certain rules more readily, starting to see more chronic workarounds, that can potentially be a vulnerability of the system, and we're going to, that's how we're going to send these extra resources to try to address it. You can also, and we're doing this in a couple of different cases where literally just sharing back what we're seeing. So in the case, we're doing some work in the emergency room of Ohio State's Medical Center, and part of the way that we ensure future participation is to keep them involved and engaged about what we're doing now. So what we found is that there's definitely a power gradient, between physicians and nurses and pharmacists, and we're finding different configurations of those three roles that keep the system safe, and keep multiple of those perspectives together. And we're just about to share that back with them, even though I haven't told my lab, that we're just about to share that back with them to say that you guys each have a role in the safety. Please keep doing these things, and I'm going to share that across the different roles to say this is what all of you guys are doing together. The same thing we saw with, gosh, where else did we see that? Oh, I've lost it, but I'll get it back. We also did a study 2 years ago, and again, I'm breaking my rule. The external folks did it, but we want to start training the internal folks to do it, where we revealed to a set of surgeons and nurses that they actually were seeing the patient very differently. Nurses were looking at symptoms, and physicians were looking at diagnoses and how the symptoms were aligned with diagnoses or not. And that rift was actually keeping them from being able to communicate on a large number of patients. And so just showing them, feeding that back to them to say, look, we saw this difference that you were not aware of. We made something invisible visible, has been very valuable to them. And not only valuable to Ohio State, but that's actually, that's been sent to a number of surgery conferences to say, this is something we need to be looking out for. So that's been seen as the larger community as being valuable. And I want to echo a point that Tom just sent to all of us to say this idea of we can't just be neutral about this idea of blaming the folks that did something different. We have to understand, they have to understand that we will be their advocate, that this is something that is crucial and necessary to the system. And they need to understand that we're gonna have their back. We're not just gonna sit silently and, so there's one, and then this has happened to me before when I've talked about some of the adaptations that we've seen in the organization. Somebody in management comes, red in the face and will say, well, who did that? And I'll have to look, not only am I going to remain silent, which is the very least I could do, but I'm going to say, I'm not going to tell you because that was, because one, I'm not entirely trusting that you're going to see it for the critical adaptation that it was. So until you prove to me that the organization has made that complete shift, I am not going to, I'm going to protect the people that are helping create safety every day. I don't think I use those exact words, but pretty close. So we all need to have an active part in, in order to reveal these things, we need to, again, advocate for them. It's not just being silent in the face of a safety 2 kind of blame fest, or safety 1 blame fest, sorry. But how are we actively doing this so that we can engender that trust? That's critical. Hopefully that was a little bit longer of a soapbox than I thought I was going to go on, but hopefully that helps. Okay, so I think that gets us through the sweet spot for our new Army, or at least a sweet spot for our new Army. And I just wanted to recap it real quick. And again, like when I see these kinds of recaps are nice, but take it with a grain of salt as well. But just to recap, frontline, there are lots of people that we could tap to help with the work. The project team maybe have tens of people or maybe a couple people. External, they're one to few. Availability to help per person, is very low from the frontline. Project team, has moderate. External could have high. Training is often low. Project team is moderate. External is high. And the sweet spot is this kind of lightweight data collection describing real work. Project team is moderate data collection, lightweight to moderate analysis. And then external is kind of education, sparingly used everywhere else, bring in patterns, kind of help and advise that way. So I wrote this and I was really excited with myself, and I read it again. I'm like, it's not perfect. It's awfully prescriptive. So I wanted to really think about what we really care about here is have you put an organization that has this kind of lightweight, cheap analysis that that with the interactions between these various groups that are working together, we can shift perspective and shift resources. So some examples of that is, in doing this work with it, the frontline workers get a sense of something that's changing that triggers some kind of ad hoc analysis. Or the project team and the frontline workers together create a new lightweight kind of probe because maybe the other one's not working very well. Or external experts working with all the company employees to understand anchors and new probes and analyses. And I didn't touch that point explicitly in the beginning with my graphic of safety 2. We can't study everything. We can't analyze everything. We have to pick what we're going to look at, and that's going to be really important what we pick. And then last, and again, these are just examples, we get some feedback from the front line that helps the project team and the external experts that a current probe's not working, isn't collecting what it intended, requires a change. All of those things, we're working together across these different groups. So I wanted to talk about what we're doing in CECL, in the Cognitive Systems Engineering Laboratory, and how we're focusing on adaptations. We think that's a good anchor to get started. And why are adaptations important? Adaptations are important because those adaptations occur when your system is challenged in ways that the normal stuff isn't working anymore. And those are really important things for us to understand as resilience engineers, as cognitive systems engineers, as safety 2 personnel. Like, when are we outside of our original performance boundaries, those edges? We know that outside those edges, some combination of your policies and procedures will be inadequate to deal with it. The book and verse of your training will be insufficient. You're going to have to do something else, something new. It might be a little bit of something new, and it could be a lot of something new. And what we want to understand is when your people do that thing that's new, is that indicative of future brittleness or future resilience? So are they, and we have to understand the nature of today's adaptations in the face of these challenges to try to predict or extrapolate, to try to anticipate when those challenges get a little bit more or a little bit different or combined in different ways. Do we think that the system has the right capabilities, meta capabilities, generic capabilities to be able to deal with those new challenges? So why we like adaptation and stretches and edges. We can look at different adaptation patterns, and again, we see these as we stretch to deal with these these new strains. As we get to the edge and past it, these new edges and strains help us understand something more about our stretches, and it keeps moving through here. And we're going to hit all of these different types of stretches that we're looking at, or characteristics of stretches that we're looking at. We're not going to talk about the edges too much today, although we could. Now, what we're doing is we're building off of our tool called the systemic contributor. Oh, man, I still have the wrong words. This is systemic contributor and adaptations diagramming. Someday I'm gonna get all the right words here on the right slides. And where we started was this is a response to the root cause analysis methodology in thinking about previous accidents. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about proactive. So we created an innovation. I want you to really pay attention to this slide. This shift is really important. If you blink, you're going to miss it. So here's the innovation, the proactive. We removed the event. I'll do it again, just guys missed it. And so we started with this big event, some accident that happened, and started working back to understand the pressures and the conflicts that led to that set of adaptations that resulted in the event, that contributed to the event. And what we realized is that we could take the event away, still look at the adaptations, the day-to-day adaptations, and the not so day-to-day adaptations, and we can still come back and see how those adaptations are the result of conflicts of multiple pressures or expectations on the system. So how these workers are dealing with the conflicts or trade-offs between these different pressures, and it still works. So so again, why we started with this in, for retrospective is it's lightweight. We found it to be productive in a number of different settings, and it's sustainable. There are a couple organizations right now that are using this without us. In fact, they started, one of them in St. Louis started this without us, got a little bit of advice along the way, and is now doing this without us. And it doesn't require extensive training. This is the one we're working on right now, where either the frontline workers themselves or a safety professional can work with them to start understanding, first, give us some background about this situation that precipitated an adaptation, tell us about the textbook behavior that should guide your behavior or your actions. Now tell us what you did and how it's different than textbook. And then from this thing that you did, let's work backwards and start to see, what, you did it differently than textbook. What are the pressures and expectations that lead to textbook, or that helped craft the textbook? How are those things conflicting with each other? How did you manage those conflicts, or what are the important parts about those trade-offs? And then how do we get to the adaptation itself? So this is something that we're working with, again, a couple of organizations right now on, and we're finding that we absolutely can have safety professionals without the external experts. They can deliver, they can implement this. We haven't had a whole, we think that frontline workers can do this as well. There's no reason why they couldn't. We just haven't seen it. There's some, we haven't had an organization like really test it yet, but we think that can happen as well. And so we see this as serving maybe two purposes. The first purpose is just to get a lay of the land. What are the types of adaptations we're seeing? Let's get a catalog of the different pressures and expectations that are on the system, and let's get a catalog of how they tend to conflict. Now this is a little bit more involved at first, because we want to understand, we don't know what we need to understand, so we're gonna, we have to go a little bit deeper. We've got to use, more qualitative techniques. We don't know enough to start, excuse me, start like counting things or getting rates, but that's where we want to go. So where we're going, so now the obstacles. With this, we found that we need to work really hard with the safety team to be able to, there's a script you can work from, but then there's being able to see things that could potentially be interesting. And I'm not going to tell you that that the experts have cornered the market on finding things that are interesting, but I've noticed in going through these interviews, poring over the data, that there are a lot of times where I see something really interesting because of my eyes and my conceptual framework that interviewer didn't think was important, and so we missed it. And that's a fact of life. It's going to happen. But what we're trying to understand is how can we minimize that as much as possible? So then when they see something interesting, when there's something like that doesn't seem quite right, how do we help them dig into it further? And that's kind of part of the journey with that skill.
Mike, you have a question from Sudeep.
Okay, does there have to be an incident? No, so sorry, Sudeep, sorry I wouldn't make that more clear. With this one, so the question from Sudeep is, does there have to be an incident or some flashpoint for the SCAD, or can you trace adaptations without necessarily having an event evolve? The purpose of this that you guys are seeing right now, and Marcin, I will get to your question as well, it's a great one. The purpose of this, if you see, there's no accident or incident here. We're not ever asking them about an accident or an incident or a flash point or even like a major juncture point. We're saying, tell us about a time where you did something differently. So that could be, this could be a workaround story. This could be what we call a contingent adaptation, to say there was this time on a Thursday And let me tell you about it. So absolutely, you do not have to have, in fact, we do not want proactive SCAD, which I think SCAD is going to become the proactive side, and we'll talk about reactive SCAD as the one with the event, but with that, the dust isn't settled yet on that. But yes, absolutely, this can and should be used to understand real work as it's going on without an accident or incident. Another question, do you apply SCAD with individuals or teams or cross-functional teams? The answer is yes. So these interviews right now tend to be individual, because it's about what one person did, but they could easily be, what did your team do? You can start getting a team together to talk about this together and how they did it together. And so you could use it as, I think it should be able to scale up or down as much as you want to. And then Yvonne asked, will this be a good understanding of improvisations? Now, let's talk about the word improvisation for a second, because I can't tell you around the planet all the different connotations of improvisation, but in the United States, improvisation in industrial communities has a negative connotation. It's not seen positively. But yes, so if we think about improvisation as the ability to do something different, to adapt, and the kinds of and the intensity of that adaptation, which I'll talk about in a second. Yes, we would expect. So this, we think, this is a good way to understand improvisations, not only for the individual, which is the individuals are idiosyncratic, but how does that improvisation reflect the goals and conflicts and trade-offs and the pressures and expectations that that individual was under, and as well. What is the inherent ability of this system to be able to improvise? Some systems are going to be able, for a variety of reasons, to improvise better. They're able to go further with the same kind of raw ingredients than others. Okay, and then the question, what are the dots, what are the lines, and how do you actually create the catalog of pressures? So we put these in the cartoon. If you notice, let's go back. If you notice, there are no lines on this one, and we can deliver it this way, that we have a series of, you put your adaptation, or maybe one adaptation was actually the result of other adaptations up here, and then you can put as many conflicts as you want, and as many pressures as you want, and then you want to connect them. The reason there are dots and lines here is we think, again, from where we've delivered this, we think that having some blanks to fill in are helpful. So I would consider all of these dots, these are places where I put a conflict or a trade-off. And actually, when we actually see one, and I didn't think to share one, when we see a real one, we have, like, there's a pressure up here. So let's say this pressure is throughput or production pressure. And then we have another pressure that is service or collegiality. And interestingly, in some industries, we find this is a really invisible pressure, but it's a really, really strong pressure. Collegiality across organizations, collegiality within a team. Some call this professionalism. Like, what are the professional rules? When is it okay to ask for help? When is it really kind of not okay to ask for help? And so hopefully you could quickly see that when you have throughput pressure and collegiality pressure and some safety pressure, those, in a given situation on a Thursday, those could absolutely conflict. So these are the starter lines, but we would actually absolutely expect people to say, okay, oh, sorry, here, I went the wrong way, I got lost. That we would actually connect, say these two pressures come together and they conflict, and then this is the trade-off that we're seeing, or the trade, how people are dealing with the trade-off. This trade-off plus this trade-off plus this trade-off all come together, and that's how I see this decision was made for this adaptation. So that's what the dots and the lines are. The dots are expected to be places where I would mark the trade-off or the pressure, or in this case, the adaptation. The lines are how we connect those things together so that you can start to see the contribution of each of them coming into the downstream effects. So hopefully that helps. And again, this is the tool we're using now. We certainly could improve it, I'm sure. Oh, we got one more. So Andy says, oh, wow, there's more, sorry. Okay, so great question. In complex organizations, there'll be multiple perspectives on any topic. Whose perspective do you prioritize? And I would say that it depends. And I would say you probably don't prioritize. You need to understand all of those different perspectives and start to reveal. And this should happen. So one story doesn't give you a picture. One story from multiple perspectives doesn't give you a system picture. What you need to start seeing is patterns. So if in this story, a pattern comes out about these two kinds of pressures conflicting, and then you see lots of stories with those two pressures conflicting, that's a pattern. You start to see that pattern, so say, this is an important thing for me to understand. These two goals are in conflict reliably and frequently. That could be a problem. The details of the story, they kind of fall away quickly. So yeah, and that's also data. If the perspectives are so wildly different and their perspectives are wildly different consistently, that's a pattern. And so that's something you need to work with. So for example, the St. Louis group, they actually realized that two of their clinical groups that came together, in this case, it was intensivists and surgery, they were not just seeing the patient differently, they were seeing the stories about the patient differently. They were retelling the stories differently. And thankfully they were in the room to do it, so they could start saying, oh, this is interesting, this is data, we need to resolve this. And that's important. So what you're doing there is actually that's data too. So it's not, I don't think it's whose perspective you prioritize, although that could be important at times. It's, oh, we have a gap in our organization. And is that idiosyncratic, that can be, that's a glitch, that's a blip, or is that data that we need to track to say we reliably have multiple perspectives that are in conflict. They are not complementary. They're not the kind of multiple perspectives we want to get to some kind of consensus or some kind of bigger picture. They are fractionary or fractured. And then Andy brings up, so this is a Swiss cheese model. It's a little bit, well, that's a whole other conversation. Now, one of the tenets of the Swiss cheese model is this idea of latent factors or latent vulnerabilities. That can lead us astray. So what we're saying is these pressures exist, and these pressures exist so that the system can run. Now, they have unintended consequences, but they exist for a reason. If those pressures didn't exist, the organization wouldn't exist. What we're trying to understand is, how are these pressures coming together? How are they being perceived? How are they affecting the capabilities, and how we're building those capabilities, how we're refreshing those capabilities in order to stay resilient. So the way I look at Swiss cheese, and again, the only thing that can lead us astray, and I don't know, it's not about the Swiss cheese itself, but it's about the common and typical perceptions and perspectives on Swiss cheese and how they're implemented, is most organizations, and Andy, I don't know you in particular, but most organizations that implement Swiss cheese, they send the team out to go look for their latent vulnerabilities. Let's look for my latent factors and let's fix them. So if I rejigger the holes, which are vulnerabilities, then I've solved this. This is different. What we're saying here is, what are the capabilities? So it's in some ways it's the other side of the coin. In some ways it really is a kind of a different way of looking at it. What are the capabilities that these people are bringing to bear in order to deal with the realities of their system? So I'm looking at the capabilities that I need to support and understand. I'm not looking at these interdependent, latent vulnerabilities or holes in the system. More good questions. Where do constraints fit into this tool? Constraints are pressures. So I am under time, if I'm under time pressure, if I'm under resource pressure, and again, seeing that resource pressure or constraint once is a blip. If I see in my stories, and we can dig out my stories, that we are resource constrained all the time, that's a pressure. So So that is providing pressure. And so, you know, so as we think about the portfolio of adaptations that are available to our front end workers, they are constrained. So I would put those constraints out here in pressures and expectations. All right, what time is it? Woo, getting close. I may finish. So right now, so what we've realized is that we asked, and where the organization is working with right now, we have asked those frontline workers and those project teams, in this case a safety organization, to learn too much too quickly. That's what we've figured out. And so what our current focus is to try to simplify into thinking, how are these adaptations, because we really need to get to, if we're going to implement this proactive safeties, we're going to focus on how changes or adaptations are changing over time. So we're not going to look at states. We're not going to look at behaviors that are good or bad, because I said before, it's really difficult in enough cases to understand, is this a good behavior or a bad behavior? What I know is that when I take all of the behaviors in total, the system is running. The system is running right now. So what we're looking at is how are their adaptations, how are they changing over time? And to get a change over time, to get a rate, to understand the triggers, to understand the frequency, that requires a lot of data points. Because if I test, you know, every 9 months, then and it looks like it's a little bit higher, like I don't know if that's really higher or not. I don't know what happened in the middle, if it went down and up, or if this is, you know, if this is a noisy indicator, or if this is a pretty quiet indicator. So this little change at the end is really meaningful. So we need more data. And if we need more data, we need more people. And if we need more people, we need more, as I said before, more participation from the project workers and the frontline workers. So this is what we're trying to go after. This is the way we're thinking about doing it. We're actually going to lighten our story elicitation. So instead of asking them to tell whole stories, we're going to focus them. So we're either going to theme them around a noted or notable type of adaptation. So that, and I have a couple patterns of that down below. Or it could be one that we just want to know more about. And they're going to collect these targeted variables, which again, I will talk about in a second. But so it's basically trying to, you know, we'll do a more open-ended session, but with each of them, we'll say, okay, with this adaptation, how does that rank or rate, or how do you qualify it on these different dimensions? So I'm going to go through the dimensions in a second. So as opposed to this big open-ended thing that we do a more open-ended analysis on, which again is something that a number of the you know, if you're trained to do it, that's fine. If you're not trained to do it, that's hard to just kind of jam into an organization. But instead of that, we're trying to do a much more targeted analysis that can be analyzed more readily. The second thing we're doing I'm thinking about this kind of in-process frontline data collection. So I don't know how far Waze goes, but in the United States, it's pretty popular. What Waze is an app that it's kind of like a Google Maps app or a GPS app, but people out on the road are actually plugging in different traffic hazards, different places where there are police stops, places where there's construction, and they're doing it as they're driving, which I never do because I think that's, I can't imagine being able to do that and drive, but people do it. But we're thinking about what could we do while either during shift or on shift that frontline folks can collect about the work that they're doing. So that again, we could target a certain number of adaptations, like if you do this, let me know about it. And again, that could be happening in real time or at the end of the shift. It looks like I have a comment or a question. Oh, that's just Yvonne. You have 3 minutes. Fine. I think I can make it. So here are example variables that we're tracking right now. So again, with the pressures, like we create that catalog of pressures that are in the system from those initial interviews. We say in this story, this pressure was a contributor. These pressures in conflict are happening, and this pressure is being relaxed, or that pressure is being relaxed, and in what order. So we're trying to understand it from that perspective. And then from the adaptation perspective, we're saying, what's the kind of adaptive capacity? And that's, we could call that slack in our community as well. That is, in this adaptation is either being injected or increased or removed or decreased. We could also look at the intensity, and that's something I'm starting to get better language around. Are these lower intensity adaptations like just like slight adjustments or using a different process, or is it repurposing? Like I'm using this for a way in a way that it wasn't meant to be used, but now I have to use it that way, or I choose to use it that way, or improvising, where I'm really kind of going out in a new way, using really putting things together in very new and novel ways to do this adaptation. We think it's important to think about whether this person, or whether this agent or team tried to take this whole thing on by themselves, or if they try to recruit additional resources. And that gets to your question about constraints. What resources are able to be recruited, and then this idea of workaround versus contingent adaptation. We're trying to track that as well. The kinds of questions we're asking is, again, how often, what's the frequency, what's the rate of these patterns occurring, what's the magnitude of the challenge that triggers them? Like, is this, is this, so for example, more traffic or more patients than usual, more uncertainty than usual? What is the magnitude of that challenge, and how does that change over time? And I want to end with just a couple of generic patterns that we found. And again, I think this is the sweet spot for these patterns is the experts bringing those to the community, but it could be brought by anybody. So this is one of the things we're talking about. So one of these patterns is stretching the corners, and that's when, with increased overall workload or asymmetric workload, meaning one worker has more than another, with the expectations or pressures that we have smooth operation and maintaining throughput, that we see this adaptation. We see them taking control of processes or areas outside their responsibility, relaxing one or more procedures, or coordinating outside of normal practices. And then the benefits we see are reduced cost of coordination in this case. The potential downside is taking actions with incomplete data. So that's one of the generic patterns we see. And the other generic pattern that I want to share with you is this idea of increasing worker complexity now for reduced complexity or expanded options later. So that could look like really risky behavior, and it is. It's increasing risk now to alleviate risk later. And we see this, when certain aspects of a challenge present themselves, we see this pattern. So I will finish and see if there's one more. Awesome. So I don't know, by my watch, I have 2 minutes if there are other questions, or Yvonne, if there's something you wanted to announce, we can use the last minute or so that way. I will leave it up to you, Yvonne.
Yes, I think we have 1 minute now, and I think we can continue the discussions, and we will put the webinar in the website. And thank you very much, Mike, for sharing this knowledge. I think that people have the contacts with the Ohio State University, and to have, maybe there will be groups trying to explore these patterns of adaptation. So let's start the discussion in a broader community. And I would like to announce the next webinar that will be from Brazil. That is Eder Eriksson. So he will talking about the exploration of challenges and opportunities on implementing resilience in practice in the oil and gas industry. So it will be the 30th of March. All the previous webinar and this webinar will be available on our website. So you can check for the people that cannot attend, and you can inform your colleagues. So thank you very much, Mike. And with that, we close the session.
Excellent, thanks everybody. And just, please, Sudeep wants a scone. So please feel free, in fact, don't hesitate to email me, rayo.3@osu.edu. I'm also on Twitter at @docrayo. So love to hear from you.
I close the session.
Great, thanks everybody.